1945. The Pacific, Iwo Jima. The air here is thick with the smell of sulfur and the sickly sweet stench of rotting corpses. For the United States Marines, this is a cursed island. Try to imagine yourself standing on this black volcanic ash beach. On your back, you are carrying two massive steel tanks weighing 32 kilograms, 70 pounds. The heavy straps dig into your shoulders. With every breath, your lungs feel like they are burning. In your hands you hold not a rifle, but a metal nozzle connected to a rubber hose. Your comrades around you are all prone, hugging the dirt for cover. Only you must stand up, because you are a flamethrower operator. Your mission is to clear that Japanese pillbox ahead that is spewing machine gun fire. You know that the moment you stand up, every Japanese sniper will train their sights on you. In the eyes of the enemy, you are not a man. You are a walking bomb, a high-value target. If a bullet pierces the compressed gas tank on your back, or ignites the fuel inside, you will instantly become a human torch, incinerated into ash within seconds. It has been calculated that during the fiercest beach landings, the average life expectancy of a flamethrower operator on the battlefield was measured in minutes, sometimes less than 30 seconds. You must run across that open ground with zero cover before death finds you. You must sprint to within 20 meters of the bunker. Then you pull the trigger. Whoosh. A stream of orange-red liquid fire erupts, the temperature instantly skyrocketing to 1,000 degrees Celsius. This is not ordinary fire. This is napalm. It is a viscous, unquenchable chemical substance. It sticks to walls like glue. It sticks to skin, and it flows right through the firing slits of the bunker. Immediately following the flame, you hear non-human screams coming from inside. This is not fighting. This is slaughter. It was the cruelest, most terrifying, yet most indispensable weapon of World War II. Today, we tell the story of these men who carried hell, and why, in the damp, dark cave warfare of the Pacific, only this extreme fire could put an end to the endless madness. To understand why humanity created such a cruel weapon, we must first look at the unique nature of the Pacific theater. This war was entirely different from Europe. In Europe, tanks could race across plains, and infantry could fight urban battles in ruins. But on the tropical islands of the Pacific, American forces faced a completely new defense system. From Tarawa Atoll in 1943 to Palaliu in 1944, and finally to Okinawa in 1945, the Japanese army changed their tactics. They no longer launched suicidal bonsai charges. Instead, they went underground. Japanese engineers utilized natural coral reefs and volcanic caves to construct underground fortresses as complex as ant colonies. These pillboxes often had firing slits only a few inches above the ground, covered by thick concrete, steel plates, and earth. Ordinary rifle bullets merely scratched the surface. Grenades thrown at them would bounce back. Even naval gunfire and aerial bombs struggled to destroy tunnels buried deep underground. American soldiers found themselves trapped in a desperate nightmare. Every step forward was paid for in blood. You couldn't see the enemy, yet bullets came from all directions. Some U.S. units suffered casualty rates exceeding 50% on the very first day of landing. They needed something that could flow around corners, seep into cracks, and ignore cover. A weapon that could silence the enemy hiding in the dark without the need for precise aiming. And so, the flamethrower demon, briefly used in World War I and then forgotten, was reborn in the Pacific. And this time it became far more lethal. Let's dissect the most iconic individual weapon of the U.S. military in World War. The M2 Flamethrower. It was a clumsy machine weighing 70 pounds. For a soldier marching through a tropical jungle, malnourished and exhausted, carrying this was pure torture. The backpack system consisted of 3 steel cylinders. The 2 larger tanks on the sides held about 4 gallons of mixed fuel. The smaller tank in the center held hypressier nitrogen. When the operator squeezed the trigger, the nitrogen acted like a piston, forcing the fuel from the side tanks through the hose and out to the handheld wand. At the muzzle of the wand, there was a small ignition system. It contained magnesium or black powder. The moment the fuel sprayed out, the igniter lit it, creating a dragon of fire. It sounds simple, but in practice, it was fraught with mechanical risks. If the igniter got wet, you wouldn't spray fire, but a stream of pungent gasoline, making you even more dangerous to yourself. If the pressure valve failed, the gas tank could explode. But the most fatal problem was range. Early flamethrowers used regular gasoline. Gasoline has a flaw. It evaporates too quickly and is too light. When sprayed, it quickly burns up into a giant fireball. It looks spectacular, but the actual lethality is low because most of the heat dissipates in the air. Furthermore, the range of regular gasoline was only 10 to 15 meters. This meant the operator had to be right in the enemy's face to fire essentially a suicide mission. The US military needed a fuel that could spray further, burn longer, and stick better. In 1942, in a secret laboratory at Harvard University, a chemist named Louis Fieser was conducting an experiment that would forever change the face of war. His goal was clear: find a thickening agent that could turn liquid gasoline into a jelly-like substance. After countless failures, they finally discovered a formula: mixing aluminum salts of naphthenic acid and palmitic acid. Taking the first parts of these two words, this new substance was naminap. The birth of napalm was the turning point in the history of the flamethrower. This gel fuel had several terrifying properties. First, it was heavy. When sprayed, it didn't disperse like mist, but shot out like a coherent stream of water. This instantly doubled the range of the M2 Flamethrower to 40 meters or more. Second, it was extremely sticky. It stuck to tank armor, it stuck to damp wood, and it stuck to human skin. Once it got on you, you couldn't pat it out. Hitting it only spread the fire to more places. Third, it burned long and hot. It didn't burn out instantly, but continued to burn 4 minutes, like a patch of molten lava. When this new fuel was shipped to the Pacific, American soldiers were surprised to find that it could even bounce. If you shot the stream of fire at a wall or ceiling at the right angle, the burning gel would ricochet like a billiard ball, flying deep into blind corners of the tunnels. This was no longer just fire. It was liquid death. With the weapon in hand, tactics were needed. After suffering heavy casualties, the Marine Corps developed a standard operating procedure specifically for dealing with Japanese bunkers, known as Corkscrew and Blowtorch. It was a precisely coordinated dance of death. First, the corkscrew. Upon spotting a Japanese bunker, a regular infantry squad would suppress it with light machine guns and rifles, forcing the Japanese inside to keep their heads down. Then, the demolition team would flank like a corkscrew, approaching from the side to blow up outer defenses or clear mines. Then, the blowtorch entered the stage. Under the cover of his comrades, the flamethrower operator would sprint toward the bunker from a blind spot. He couldn't run in a straight line. He had to use shell craters and tree stumps for cover. When he reached a position about 20 meters from the firing slit, it would stop, take a deep breath, and steady the heavy wand. The first shot was usually a test, or to blind the enemy. Thick smoke would instantly engulf the firing slit. Then came the second shot, the killing blow. The operator would hold the trigger down for 3 to 5 seconds, pouring a continuous stream of orange-red fire into the bunker. Immediately after, other infantrymen would rush up and throw satchel charges or grenades into the slit, collapsing the structure and burying the enemy alive. This tactic was highly efficient, but also extremely brutal. In the Battle of Pelileo, U.S. forces advanced the line by burning out positions one hole at a time. But for the operator executing this mission, every meter was a gamble with the Grim Reaper. To be a flamethrower operator required a special kind of courage, or perhaps a certain degree of madness. In the Marines, these men were often volunteers, or the unlucky ones assigned by officers. They didn't need high rank, but they had to be physically strong, because that 70-pound gear, in tropical heat, could make a man faint from dehydration. But physical pain was minor. The psychological pressure was devastating. Japanese soldiers were strictly trained to identify the threat of the flamethrower. Therefore, Japanese snipers had a priority kill list. First, officers. Second, radio man. Third and sometimes tied for first the flamethrower operator. As long as you revealed even a glimpse of those giant metal tanks on the battlefield, countless bullets would fly your way. Hollywood movies often show that a bullet hitting the fuel tank causes a massive explosion. In reality, this wasn't common. as the fuel mixture wasn't always at an explosive limit. The more common horrifying scenario was a bullet piercing the tank, causing the high-pressure gas to leak. The powerful thrust would spin the operator around like a top, smashing him against rocks. Or the leaking napalm would soak his uniform, which would then be ignited by a tracer round or spark. That kind of death is a soldier's deepest fear. You watch your own body burn, helpless. Your comrades dare not get close to you because the fire cannot be extinguished. They can only watch you turn into charcoal. Therefore, many operators, when hit and unable to retreat, would beg their comrades to shoot them. It was an act of mercy. For the Japanese soldiers hiding in the caves, what was it like to face a flamethrower? It was a horror that transcended physical injury. When napalm was sprayed into a closed bunker, the death it brought was not just from burning. First, there was oxygen depletion. The violent combustion would instantly suck all the oxygen out of the confined space and generate massive amounts of carbon monoxide. Many Japanese soldiers were found with no burn marks on their bodies. They died of suffocation or inhaled superheated toxic smoke, which cooked their lungs from the inside out. Second, psychological collapse. Fire triggers the most primal instinctual fear in humans as animals. When you saw tongues of fire drilling into the tunnel like living snakes, no matter how deep you hid, the heat wave would catch you. In the later stages of the Battle of Iwo Jima, many Japanese soldiers chose to commit suicide with grenades rather than face the fate of being burned alive. U.S. soldiers often found piles of bodies at the entrances of cleared caves. These men weren't burned. They were cut down by machine guns trying to flee the fire, or they had taken their own lives. This fear even affected generations of Japanese after the war. That soundwish became synonymous with hell. As the war progressed, the U.S. military found that while man-portable flamethrowers were effective, their fuel capacity was too low. The fuel in a single soldier's tank only lasted for about 10 seconds of firing. After those 10 seconds, the operator became a walking target, carrying empty metal cannons. So, the U.S. decided to scale up the demon. They mounted flamethrowers onto Sherman tanks. This was the M4 Sherman Zippo, or the famous crocodile flame tanks. These steel monsters carried hundreds of gallons of napalm internally. The main gun barrel, or the position where the machine gun used to be, was replaced with a giant nozzle. Now, the rules of the game had changed. A soldier could spray 40 meters. A flame tank could shoot a massive column of fire 100 meters or further, and it could fire continuously for minutes. In the Battle of Okinawa, flame tanks became the absolute protagonists. Facing the solid coral fortresses of the Japanese, infantry could not get close. At this moment, a flame tank would rumble up and aim its nozzle at the cave mouth. The scene was like a monster from a sci-fi movie. A giant pillar of fire poured into the cave like a high-pressure water cannon. It is said that in some interconnected tunnel systems, when U.S. forces sprayed fire into one entrance, flames and thick smoke would burst out of another exit hundreds of meters away, turning the entire mountain into a giant oven. This was the industrial crushing of flesh and blood. Summer, 1945. With the dropping of 2 atomic bombs, the war ended. The Pacific returned to calm. Those scorched palm trees grew green leaves again, and the rain washed the black soot from the rocks. But for the men who had carried the flamethrowers, the war never ended. Herschel Williams, a flamethrower operator, who won the Medal of Honor on Iwo. In that battle, he single-handedly destroyed 7 Japanese bunkers. He was a hero. But for decades after the war, he suffered deeply from PTSD. He once said, "I tried to forget that smell. It was the smell of roast pork. But you knew. It was human flesh. That smell sticks in your nose. It sticks in your memory. And no matter how many times you shower, you can't wash it off." Flamethrower operators rarely spoke of their experiences. Because in civilized society, burning a person to death is considered the most cruel act. On the battlefield, they were the key to solving problems. But in peacetime, they were looked at as freaks, or even butchers. The U.S. military continued to use flamethrowers after World War II, in Korea and Vietnam. It wasn't until 1978 that the Department of Defense officially phased out the flamethrower. Not because it wasn't effective, but because it was too cruel, sparking too much humanitarian controversy. When we look back at this history, it is easy to stand on the moral high ground and condemn the inhumanity of the flamethrower. But on the bloody battlefields of the Pacific in 1945, for those young soldiers pinned down on the beach, unable to lift their heads under machine gun fire. When they looked back and saw that figure walking up with the heavy steel tanks, they didn't see a demon. They saw a savior, the only hope that could bring them home alive. The flamethrower is one of the most extreme tools humanity has ever created to destroy its own kind. It symbolizes the ugliest side of war. To survive, we must become crueler, more ruthless, and more like beasts than the enemy. The man who carried hell ignited the enemy, but he also scorched his own soul. This is the truth of the Pacific War. No glory, only burning.